Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 5 of this season's Challenges in the Streets. Today, we have information about portable ground ladders, right? So if we think about that for a minute, a lot of the things we've talked about thus far, specifically in the boss talks, right, the deployment of portable ground ladders has come up. So I think this is going to be very important, and as we've talked about before, right, the purpose of the program, company officer level, is to address those things that fall in the gaps between what you learn at the training school and what happens in policy and what we carry on the apparatus. So I think that's important, and so we're excited to talk about that today in terms of portable ground ladders. A couple housekeeping issues. So if you are a certified chief officer and you wish to receive COPDI credit, then make sure that you signed in on your YouTube account using your name and your fire service ID, and then remember at the end to do the same thing. What else? So there was a fire yesterday, right? Fire in 23's area. Pretty significant fire on the rooftop, pretty spectacular if I get the fellas to throw that first photo up. So these came from local 1664 social media account, so I'll give credit to whoever took the photos. But, so these are new buildings, right? So the fire was on the rooftop of a brand new building. We have tons of brand new mid-rise, high-rise buildings, whatever you want to call them, buildings with standpipes in them. And if you listen to this incident, or if you were on the incident, you know that there was a failure of one of the standpipe components, which forced the companies to have to take some other actions. Pop up the second picture. Right, so that's pretty impressive, right? We just started, we talked about automatic fire alarms, right? You saw a modification to now getting an engine and truck to help you out on these things, right? We are going to formidable sized buildings with fancy fire protection systems. And most of the time, those systems work, but they are only as good as they were installed and inspected and maintained. So you have always got to be ready to figure out what am I going to do if the design system fails me for whatever reason. So something happened here. We just have early information on it. And from a training perspective, right, so part of the boss talk and the challenges in the street, from the training perspective, we hope to come back next month with a little more info in there about, hey, what happened? What was the workaround? What might you do in the future should something like this happen? What are some of your choices? And next month we have Chief Dempsey, who will be doing automatic sprinklers, and we've asked him to, hey, take a look at this incident and at least provide some information, especially since he did the standpipe component a few months ago. So that's on the horizon. Good work by those folks done there on 23's, on that 23 fire yesterday, whatever they did to work around that. So kudos to them, and we need all companies to think about that. It doesn't matter if you have a high rise or not, right? You may have to help solve that problem. So today, portable ground ladders. Happy to have Lieutenant Martinez with us here today. I'm going to turn it over to Captain Brady Miller. And likewise, if you have questions, make sure you type them in, and I'll be the moderator and ask that. So Captain Miller, it's yours.
Chief, thank you very much. I'd like to say welcome back to the training school. Here we are again. Today we have Lieutenant Martinez from 19 on the C shift here to talk about ground ladders, some various considerations when we're deploying them, and then we are going to talk and have some video just about deploying them. Franco, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me come out here. So to Captain's point, so we put together a couple of videos and just kind of a quick synopsis. So a couple of things I wanted to go over is the ground ladders, where they're stored on apparatus, and a couple of just different things to consider before we even get into techniques. We'll go over like deploying them off engine companies, ladder companies, towers, specifically a 24, 35, and a 45 foot ladder, and then go into different specific challenges like donut-shaped buildings and how we might get ladders into those courtyards, and then setbacks and go over that. And I think we'll end the videos with some basic ladder maintenance. So yeah, let's get right to it. So some of the videos or the still shots that you see here, some things that I want guys and gals to consider before we get into those techniques is look at whatever rig you have, whether it's a truck or an engine company, and basically size up how high up the ladder tunnels are. And that's going to change how your tactic is on how to actually deploy these things off the back of the rigs, or how they're going to come off, whether it's exterior ladder on a Pierce engine or a ladder tunnel off of the Crimsons. So specifically on these, so this is Tower 23, if I'm not mistaken, and they're alkylates. So the new Tower 23 and Tower 8 are considerably higher than the old style towers. So that can make an impact on how you're going to decide on how you want to do this, whether it's a high shoulder or a regular shoulder carry.
So may I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when we talk about you're naming the brand name of the ladder in these pictures, tell me why that matters to me as a firefighter.
Yes. So when you go, if you're detailed around, most of the ladders in Montgomery County are duo safety. Some of them are still alkylates, and a lot of times the difference is weight.
So weight is the consideration more than
weight
anything.
is consideration for the guys and gals that work at Station 23 and Station 8. They know exactly what I'm talking about. Those ladders, unfortunately, on some of the sizes are considerably heavier. So, and that's why I want to bring it up, because some of the techniques that you guys are going to see here in the videos just might not work very well for, depending on what brand manufacturer is on these rigs. So it's just something to point out on also how high these ladders are and how much they weigh. So you might see some of these, and you just have to make that judgment call for even how tall you are in relation to where the ladder tunnels are. So again, some still shots of, I think this is Tower 24, and just considerations on how they're sitting, how high up they're sitting, and how tall you are or how short you are on determining how you want to deploy.
So even on the same apparatus, we're going to show different methods.
Yeah.
Tall firefighter, short firefighter, two different methods.
Yep. And some of these videos, you're going to see a taller firefighter that's 6'2", 6'3", and I'm 5'10", maybe on a good day. So
Me too.
Yeah. So it's going to change how I deploy it, and some ways that I find really easy to deploy just might be a challenge for others. All right. So this is this is just going back to some of the considerations. Shoulder carry off of the new Pierce wagons that we have. I personally find it harder for me to do a shoulder carry off of the apparatus because I have to bring it much lower to me. But if someone that was taller might find it easier. For this, from this still shot, and we have videos of this, my shoulder kind of lines up almost even with the diamond plate. So it's easier for it just to kind of sit on my shoulder up high. Again, it takes practice to feel comfortable and for it to balance and go efficiently. But we have some videos here coming up that...
A high shoulder carry like this, is the balance point roughly the same place we would carry it?
It is.
On a shoulder carry?
Just about, it is. I think the main challenge is just being comfortable doing that. This is a high shoulder carry from the Crimson engine, I believe is what they're going to show here. So to the same point, for me, it is perfectly even with my shoulder. I can slide that thing really quickly. It drops right exactly where I need it to go, and I can get moving pretty fast. I know that a lot of people out there say it's easy to throw a ladder, but hopefully we're all trying to find the fastest and most efficient way to throw a ladder. And these small little details matter. So this firefighter is taller. He's probably 6'2", 6'3", and you can tell that because maybe he might not be necessarily used to deploying it from that ladder tunnel sits much lower. So on the second turnaround, he came around and he was able to adjust his height and was able to get it out and deployed a lot quicker. But these are some of the things that hopefully the guys and gals out in the field can think about.
Are thinking about prior to doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That they need to go out and figure out, okay, well, Am I doing a high shoulder? Is that going to work for me or not? Am I doing a shoulder carry depending on my height, depending on how high those ladder tunnels are, or where the ladder is actually sitting can matter on how you're going to actually deploy it. So those are the things that they should be considering when they're deploying these ladders, because ultimately we want to try to deploy as quickly as possible, right? Even though anybody can do it, are they doing it with speed and efficiency, which is what we're hopefully looking for. All right, so again, to go to the Crimson engine, for me personally, and you'll see here in a second, the diamond plate just sits right next to my shoulder. It's easier for me just to place it on. Again, that's knowing where that ladder is going to be balanced on my shoulder. It's just, again, it's an easier carry. It's easier for me to remove. A low shoulder carry with the Pierce, for me personally, again, this is, you have to figure that out for yourself. It's just a little more cumbersome for me to drop it down. I'm dropping it maybe about a foot before it finally sits on my shoulder. But those are things that people should be considering, depending on what type of apparatus they have, to figure out what is going to work best for them to try to get it out and moving quickly.
What about placement of ladders on apparatus? Straight ladder, outside, inside? There really is no standard.
So you're referencing whether the tip is out or rather...
Tip, heel, even as far as the extension ladder on the outside versus the inside.
Yeah.
Could you tell us your thought process?
I mean, a lot of that is just...
Or your opinion, I guess?
Yeah, a lot of that is personal preference.
So what are we doing at 19 on our engine company? Is the
so
roof ladder on the outside or on the inside of the extension?
The roof ladder is on the inside.
At 2, it's that way at 2 also.
Yeah. Me personally, my consideration is I'd rather have that 24 on the outside, because a closed length of a 24 is a 14. So I have a ladder that can fill both of those roles immediately. I can basically throw a 14, and I can also have access to 24 right away. But in reference to tip in or out on ladder tunnels, depending on how many ladders you have. Or I know there's some companies that run with one of those ladders with the tip out first, and one with the tip in.
So depending on positioning of the...
Yeah, if they stop short of the building, or if they pull past the building, can help them have, so they're avoiding having to kind of spin that ladder around.
Okay.
But these are all really good things to consider, and it really just depends on how that company operates.
Chief, yes.
Yeah, so we have a question, and this comes from one of the members associated with one of our 2 rescue squads, right? So the rescue squad could be deployed. We're given instructions to deploy a ground ladder from a ladder truck, right? And they're interested in how well are the sizes indicated on the ground ladders at night and in the dark, for example. So in other words, right, somebody comes from the Wheaton Rescue Squad behind Tower 19, and hey, we got to drag a whatever.
Are they going to know what to deploy?
Without having to look at every ladder, right?
Yeah.
I guess and it would be the same with 25's truck, right? All the trucks that the 2 rescue squads run with primarily.
Yeah, I mean, coming from the manufacturer, they're all labeled accordingly on the bottom side for the most part on these ladder tunnels, and then. I would say probably the majority of the companies will either take a Sharpie or something and draw how many feet they are at the butt of the ladder to make it a little faster and a quicker deployment for those circumstances.
Does one of your earlier photos show that?
I think they do.
I think one with the measurement
yeah.
showed it.
Guys have the capability of popping back. There you go. See,
yeah, so you can see 35, 28. I don't know if that's really, yeah, there you go. So that's something you'll see also at the bottom on the plate. You'll see them, but they're either stickers or labeled. But a lot of times they come listed from the manufacturer as well for those circumstances. Now, at night, obviously that can be certainly a challenge, because a lot of times you only have like a bulb or 2 to illuminate that ladder tunnel, but certainly something to consider. All right, so kind of one of the last things before we get into actual deployments is something that I think is really useful. I used to do it all the time back when I drove a ladder company, in the mornings, I would take a 24-foot ladder, or I'm sorry, 28-foot ladder is what we had on our on the tiller truck, and I would take it out back. I'd check out the rig. I would take one ladder out. I go out back, usually by myself, and I mean that just because, you know, when I would try certain things and try to see how things were balanced or how things worked for me, if, you know, I was the only one that you know, had to deal with the criticism. But what you see here is just what can be really helpful is just taking a ladder, spinning it around, extending it, finding that balance for yourself to get really comfortable with maybe doing a high shoulder or other different techniques and just feeling comfortable with it. I'm using the halyard as well to help balance the tip of the ladder. I'm using the foot and knee placement to kind of hook the ladder into my leg, lowering it and extending it, spinning it around, and just basically I'm doing nothing but just trying to feel comfortable moving the ladder around as much as I can.
Creating your own comfort level.
Creating my own comfort level, and that kind of just pays dividends. So if I want to deploy a 24, a 28, a 35, it just makes things a lot smoother, because I don't think that, I think that deploying these ladders is so much easier when you know how they sit on your shoulder and how they balance on your shoulder.
How they feel,
Yeah.
what they're supposed to feel like when they're done. It's done correctly.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I would certainly suggest that people go out there and just do nothing but just balance it, spin it around, and lower it back down and get comfortable with the ladder, even before you even deploying it or getting it to a target.
All right, so now let's get into deploying here.
All right, so these are just some deployments, doing a high shoulder fly-in. So you'll see as we deploy this, so this is me deploying it, high shoulder. A high shoulder for me is easier because I'm shorter and it gets the ladder in a higher position. So when I am basically throwing this ladder to the ground, it goes, I think it's faster, especially when you have obstructions in front of a building where you can't butt this ladder up to a building. This is a quick and easy way to deploy a ladder. Again, I'll go along with all the balances prior to. This ends up just being something that's really easy for me to do. If you guys can pause it for a second. So I wanted to make a note that, so when I deployed this ladder, it was fly in, right? And although the manufacturer recommends that obviously the fly section should be out to have that full 750-pound capacity, just as a note for people to understand that if we're making a rescue, once I made that deployment, questions always come up, you know, do we have to flip it over? Will we still be within those manufacturer recommendations? And specifically for DUA safety, you go onto their website, they specifically mention fly in, fly out. So although we would like to have the fly out like we would normally, it's okay if you're making a rescue, if you're in the middle of making a rescue, somebody is trying to get onto that ladder. If the fly is in, it really is not a big deal. It's a 4% reduction in load capacity from a 750-pound ladder. So just know that, you know, even though we might want that ladder,
It's less than 50 pounds.
Yeah, it's negligible, if anything. Yeah, just something to know. So, and this is where we kind of get into the different heights, right? So, in this circumstance, you have the firefighter that's on the left of the screen. That's again 6'2", 6'3". The way he can deploy this ladder, I mean, because it's so much higher on his shoulder, he basically just drops it into the ground. He really doesn't have to do a whole lot of oomph to it. If you guys can play that for a second. So when I deploy it, because I'm shorter, I just have to give it a little more effort to get it up into position. But these are the things that I think are valuable to consider, right? Considering your height, considering where the ladder is, and that's why it's easier for me that it sits higher, that I can kind of sling it in. And I use that momentum as well to get that weight up in a vertical position faster. Again, it's just easier for me, and it just depends on the weight of the ladder and how tall you are. All right, so this is just another version of trying to get the ladder up. So typically when we do high shoulders, for instance, you're kind of slinging it up. You can also take this, if you guys can replay that again, and what you see me doing is I'm actually pulling up rather than trying to raise it up. I'm actually pulling it up, and as I pull from the bottom of that beam section, I'm able to raise it in that fashion as well. Just different various ways on playing around with the ladder, trying to get the ladder up. All right, so these are just some tips and tricks on getting the ladder up, right? If you don't have the ability to butt the ladder to the building, if you have bushes or obstructions or anything else, what you see here is a halogen bar that's been driven into the ground.
Can we full screen that?
Yep, so we have...
Thank you.
So what we did is we took the adze of the halogen and drove it between the concrete and the grass, and this was just a way, again, another way to be able to get the ladder up if you're by yourself. And most of these deployments that you see here are single person, right? These are kind of unfortunate because of our staffing levels on aero apparatus. You might find yourself deploying ladders by yourself. This is just a slick way of being able to stabilize that ladder, butting it to basically the shaft of that halogen bar and still being able to accomplish the deployment.
Replay that again.
Could we play that again, guys?
So that bar really doesn't move at all.
No, not very much force on it.
Yeah, especially for the lighter ladders, the 24-foot ladders, even the 28-foot ladders, they're not as heavy, so you don't need as much of a stable halogen bar into the ground for it to be successful. So here's again just another alternative using a New York hook, dropping it down. Again, this is just another way of trying to get this ladder up. Butting in position, right? If throwing the ladder or dropping the ladder like you saw before doesn't work for you, this can also be another viable alternative, is dropping a hook and using it to stabilize enough for you to raise the ladder.
Keeping a foot on the hook.
Keeping a foot on the hook, yeah. Yeah, of course. So again, just other tips and tricks. I'm sure a lot of guys and gals out there have seen this before. I've heard it called a painter's raise, right? It's once you get in position, just taking the fly section and just pulling up on it to try to make those quick adjustments rather than having to remove it from the building. Same thing, and it's simple. It's just pushing it up, getting it to the proper spot that you need it to, that you need to get it to. Again, versus the traditional extending it into position. All right, so low shoulder carry of a 35. So even though I mentioned that before that a high shoulder carry is easier for me to deploy it off the engine companies, off the Crimson and the Pierce, it's different for me personally, because of my height on Tower 19. So Tower 19, as you can tell, the ladder tunnel itself is much lower. It's almost down by my waist. So for me, deploying these ladders, so this is a 35-foot ladder, deploying the ladder and shouldering it is easier for me because it's already in that position. And these are the things that...
And you're saying 23 and 8 is much...
is higher, right? So that it might be possible that, hey, somebody that's of a shorter stature it might be easier for them to shoulder it. Again, this is just a 35-foot single-person deployment. For me, I'm doing a shoulder carry. Because of the obstructions that were there, I'm just kind of walking it back and just showing that although doing a single person 35 might not be ideal, it certainly at times can be necessary and doable. I'm not a terribly strong individual, but I think the majority of it has to do with feeling comfortable with the ladders, going out there and just playing around with the ladders, balancing the ladders around, and a lot of these things just end up just becoming a lot easier to do when you feel more comfortable with them. That hopefully when people are looking at these ladders, regardless of how heavy they are or not, that they find a way to do it successfully just by getting comfortable with them. All right, so this is another alternative. So, it can be argued, why do we need to practice on how to raise a ladder from the ground? But I know at Company 16 where I used to work, it was generally a lot of times the tillerman would take a ladder, and I would ask him, I say, hey, can you just get the ladder
Drag
to the
it
building?
to the building.
Yeah, just get it to the building. I know you got 1,000 other things to do, but it saves me a trip. So there were plenty of circumstances where I encountered ladders that were waiting for me at the front of the building. So the way that you saw me pick up this ladder is just one way, right? It's not the way, it's just a way. And I find it easier to pick up a ladder this way, and that was just by balancing it and getting it up into my shoulder. Again, I encourage people to kind of figure out what works for them, what's easiest for them. But this is just one way of getting it up on my shoulder, just walking it out. And again, these are where those balancing skills come into play. So in the video, you'll see that we have kind of a Halligan bar positioned differently, but still works really well. And this is attacking the Halligan bar from the adze end of it. Again, this is me trying to find a way to butt the ladder to the tool and getting it up. Again, this is a 35-foot raise. So what you see here, and I actually asked the guys to kind of highlight this because it was kind of a learning experience for me, right? Some of these things are just down and dirty stuff of how we get the things done. So what we see circled is when I finished raising the ladder, I kind of wish I hadn't done this, but I rested the butt on the shaft of the Halligan, which made it a lot less stable for me. So as I extended it, it was just a lot more wobbly than it needed to be. So if you guys ever use this technique, just keep that in mind, that you're using it just to stop it and brace it, and then still try to get the butt buried, into the ground. So it just made it a lot more difficult deployment for me.
Go ahead, Chief.
So we have a question. So a lot of the discussion has talked about staffing, right? So what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of a 4-person versus a 3-person ladder company? And we realize that clearly there is effectiveness, but just your thoughts, and then I'll go with Captain Miller's thoughts also.
The effectiveness between a 3-person and 4-person?
Yep, in terms of the deployment of ground ladders.
Yeah, and I'm sure obviously the guys at Company 8 probably can speak better to this because they are lucky enough to have that 4th person and can probably talk more about the benefits. But the times that we would be upstaffed, again, just an example, when I drove a truck, we had the luxury of having some Silver Spring volunteers that would come in, and it would beef our staffing levels. It was a godsend, really. I mean, that meant that we can deploy, a 35-foot ladder maybe with 2 people rather than 1. I'm not saying that I enjoy throwing a 35 by myself, but I know that I can do it, and I know that it's possible when you train with it. Having that 2nd person, that's 2 ladders coming off at the same time. That's a 35 that you don't have to do by yourself, that you can do with 2 people. Ladders are just get on the buildings so much faster. And again, I'm sure if there's anybody from Company 8, I'm sure they can attest to it, that it makes a world of difference, and I'm sure a world of difference on their backs as well.
So really kind of my stance, that truthfully, is almost the same stance as it was with our engine companies. I was an engine company officer with 3 people, then I was an engine company officer with 4 people. And I think anytime we go to a fire, we are overwhelmed with tasks. And the more people I have to help me with those tasks, I think the better off we are all the way around. I'm sure that, and I know that my opinion doesn't dictate staffing levels, but I think specifically with our ladder trucks, I don't know from my stance. I'm an engine company officer. I work at an engine company, but I work a lot of overtime. And I go to 19 or 23 or anywhere that there's a truck or a tower, and I don't know if I can reasonably expect whoever is riding behind me to put a 35-foot ladder in service by themselves. I know that it's possible. I don't know if I can have a level of expectation with that.
Yeah, because of the staffing levels, and
It's hard.
No matter what we do is going to be half as effective, right?
I would take a busload of guys to a fire if I could.
Yeah.
I like people.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so I have there's another question popped up, but before that, I just want to comment on that 35, right? So I think what both these companies' officers are talking about is important. Folks have got to figure out what ladder they can manage, right, with all their gear. Be good at that ladder. Figure out how you're going to get it, because when that person needs the ladder, meaning the rescue, then you're the one to go to it. And I would encourage folks out there, take a look at the unit citations in those firehouses. There's at least one, if not more, that were rescues affected by a single person deployment of a 35. And that person in that window could not wait for 3 or 4 more people to show up to get them out of that window.
And now that you say that, most of the big ones that I go back to, Castle Boulevard, there have been a couple in Tacoma Park, a couple in Silver Spring, where it was the truck driver operating almost by themselves, pretty much exclusively by themselves, where there was the last one that I can remember, that truck driver didn't even have time to put his gear on. Yep. Like, he was making rescues it was what Steve Wiseman, wasn't it? Was making rescues right. in his pajama shorts.
Even old Columbia Pike in the middle of the afternoon, right? Smokey driving the rescue squad, grabbed a ladder, I believe, off the engine and rescued a woman who was hanging by the windowsill, right?
Yeah.
So one person, 24, whatever, didn't matter, right? He was able to get that ladder by himself to where it needed to go. So this is important stuff, right? This is what is the difference between what you learn at the academy and what you have on your fire truck. All right, so from Lieutenant Escalero, he is interested in knowing when you feel the 20-foot ladder is appropriate.
So for people that have deployed a 20-foot ladder, it's kind of an awkward ladder because it's so long. So as you know, to put it in perspective, right? The 45-foot ladder closed is 20 feet. Right, that's the length. So my point is, it's a really long ladder. And people that have deployed it on firegrounds have at some point or another, they've done it enough, they've probably been embarrassed by it, as I have too, because the fulcrum point of it can be such a challenge. I mean, so much more. I know that there's companies that kind of swapped it out and put the 20-foot in the aerial and an 18 or 16 in the ladder tunnel because they might find it more useful. Sometimes those 20-foots are good for like dormers. They're kind of like that in-between height where, you know, it's a little too high for the dormer's a little too high for a 16, but so there's some applications for that 20-foot. I personally am not particularly a fan of the 20-foot just because I've been embarrassed by it too many times, and I can accomplish the same thing hopefully with a 24 or 16. Just my personal preference.
All right, we can go on.
Okay. All right. So, and actually, I just want to make a quick point to follow up with what Chief Davis mentioned and unit citations and these rescues. And something that I hope, if nothing else, people come away with that if you feel, if you feel really comfortable with deploying ladders, find a way to make it uncomfortable by either going faster or finding a ladder that's maybe a little heavier or finding a way to get it from point A, which is the rig, to point B, which is the window, as fast as you possibly can. And we can always challenge ourselves to be a little bit faster, to be a little bit better, to be a little more efficient, to get that ladder up. That if you feel that, you know, I'm good, I don't need to practice these anymore, I guarantee you can find a way to go and get it to the window, specifically the incidents that Chief Davis mentioned.
Can I, before we get into this 35 and raising the 35, can I ask you your general approach to putting up ladders? Like, why are we doing it? And relate it to the IRP. Tell me Lieutenant Martinez's general approach and the guidelines that he gives his guys, and what our IRP says.
I mean, at the end of the day, these ladders are for us. I mean, for us and any trapped occupants, but more often than not, it's for us. I would hate to be, you know, when I drove a truck, I would hate to be in a position where I didn't get a ladder to a window at some point, and then the incident progressed to a place where guys had to bail out of a window, and that would fall on me. I mean, that's my responsibility. I took it personally that I wanted to make sure that there was always a ladder for my guys that I, you know, live and sleep with in the firehouse, that they always had a ladder to go to. Hopefully we all take that seriously and personally.
Certainly. Did you have a preference in order that you put them up, or where you put a ladder first, or anything like that? Or was it obviously event dependent?
Yeah, it's certainly situational dependent. You know, single families versus commercials or apartment buildings. You know, if I was first due truck, you know, typically it'd be maybe side Alpha and Bravo, third due truck, side Charlie and Delta, and you end up working with the second due ladder company a lot, second due ladder company driver quite a bit to kind of coordinate those things. You know, probably coming off with a probably extension ladder would be my first choice if I had the choice, because again, as mentioned before, the closed section of a 24 is a 14, so when you have these extension ladders, you have two ladders in one, and then some, right? You have a 14, a 16, a 18, a 20, so you just have more usefulness to get that ladder to the building.
But do you have a general theory or approach? Like mine, and I'll tell you mine is, hey, we're going to get this building ready to put firefighters on the inside of it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the approach that I take, or the thought process that I have. Do you have anything like that you want to share?
I mean,
and that encompasses more than just putting the ladders up. You know, the security features, the controlling flow path, all of those types of things. But we're getting this building ready for people to be operating on the inside of it. And if somebody happens to be hanging off a balcony, we're going to get them down.
Yeah, it's just trying to obviously ladder and get as many of those windows laddered wherever that reported apartment is, and then, you know, working outwards from that. So if it's, you know, apartment 301 and it's towards the center of the building, attack that one section and then kind of slowly work your way out from there.
Is there a point where you would, when you were a truck driver, where you chose ground ladders over the aerial? Like at what point? What was your breakover point? The fourth floor, the fifth floor? Was it terrain? What was it?
Yes. Yeah.
All the above.
Yeah.
All
really,
the above.
It really is. You know, a lot of times, again, unfortunately, it's just situational dependent. If I felt that if I can get an aerial to a window faster because I looked at the building and the terrain was, you know, I had a terrible terrain or the offset was really bad or whatever. I knew, and I did. In the mornings, I would time myself. Like, how fast can I either A, throw a ladder from the ladder tunnel to the building, or how fast can I get my aerial up? And I had a ballpark time.
What is the setup time for an aerial to the fourth floor, roughly? I mean, is it 45 seconds? I don't know.
A down and dirty getting a ladder, aerial ladder to a window should probably take 60 seconds.
So the time we're putting a hand line in service, roughly, if we're using a 1 minute mark.
But if I felt that I can grab this, you know, because obviously you have to wait for the outriggers to come out and get deployed. If I felt, again, this is just, the only way to know this is with repetition, doing these things over and over again and challenging yourself and timing yourself, right? I would literally take a stopwatch and click it before I pulled it out because I wanted to know how fast can I do this and how fast can I do it the next time around. So I knew about how fast I can deploy ground ladder. If I felt that I can do it faster than me getting the aerial up, I'm pulling the ground ladders out first.
Can you put a 28-foot ladder in service or 24 or 35 as fast as we could put an aerial up?
faster, hopefully. Again, depending on terrain,
Certainly.
depending on how
far you
fast,
have to go. And
I mean, I'm lucky enough and privileged enough to teach recruits up here. And I do that towards the end of Fire 2. I've done this for numerous years. I kind of get a little bit of competition amongst the recruits as they're going through, and I start timing them, and I give them their time. So a 2-person 24-foot ladder, how long does it take from the ground to deployment to them touching the sill of the second floor? And how long, or maybe it's third floor, and how long does that take? And it could be 34 seconds. When you practice enough, it
gets fast.
It gets fast, right? But that only happens with repetition and doing it over and over again. But these are things that hopefully truck companies out there and
but it's not only truck companies, engine companies.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody needs to be working on these skills.
Of course, absolutely. I hold hopefully truck companies a little more to the fire, but hopefully they all want to know how fast does it actually take and how faster can I be.
Okay, so let's go into the 45.
So the 45-foot ladder, a couple years ago, we put together a 45-foot ladder. It was a 4-person ladder deployment. If some of them saw the videos, you saw that it was like this big open space to deploy these 45-foot ladders. And just so for reference, I mentioned before that 45 is about 20 feet or so. It's like 19 7 or so. With the poles deployed, that's another like 16 feet. So you need
width?
With the poles fully,
meaning utilizing the poles to put the ladder up.
You need about 35 feet or so of space.
Okay.
If you're using the poles to actually deploy them. So when we first did the four-person, it was wide open. There was no obstructions. Now you see in some of these videos. So I picked 8510 16th Street, which is Summit Hills Apartments, one of various really poor access on site Charlie. And so again, we picked this because it was a challenge. It was going to be difficult. So you have trees in the way, branches, bushes. You have a pool in the back side of it. You had random toys. I think there's a playground, if I'm not mistaken, back here. You have all sorts of things. So the traditional straightforward deployment that we did a few years ago with the 45 is just not going to work here. You do not have 35 feet worth of space to be able to do these deployments. So again, like anything else, we want to challenge ourselves and say, okay, well, how can we work around this? How can we get these ladders up and navigate around all of these branches and trees and everything else that's there? So, we came up, again, some down and dirty ways of being able to get a 45-foot ladder up. So as you'll see here in a moment, we're basically treating this this area like you're in an alleyway, right? So we have to go perpendicular with the building and be able to raise these ladders that way because you just don't have the space. So a couple things to note, if we can. So I know there's always heated discussions on the value of 45-foot ladders because it's so heavy, and certainly you hear a lot of maybe naysayers about that it's not usable or it's too heavy. Some things to note that previously, if you guys can just freeze it just 1 second. So years ago, when I first got on the job, and I'm sure when you were on, the 45-foot ladders were 2-section ladders, right? So right now, as I mentioned before, the closed section of a 45 is just shy of 20 feet. Mm-hmm. So these were 2-section ladders. So they were significantly longer, right? The longer the ladder, the more difficult it is. On top of that, they were truss construction ladder. Maybe they were made from alkali ladders. So they were long, they were heavy, they were wide, they were big. And, that stigma kind of stuck through the years, even to now. And whether some people realize it or not, these ladders have gotten lighter, they've gotten shorter, they've gotten smaller. So the ladder package that you see on the 45 now is different than it was back in the day where people were probably had a
apprehension to putting them in.
Yeah. So the 45 is 240 pounds. You throw 4 people on there, that's 60 pounds. Take a 60-pound dumbbell, put it in your hand. It's really not as bad as, I honestly believe that it's more of a mental block than anything else, because once you start training with these things, and even that day we had a company 16 and 19 training on these things, and we deployed it, these guys deployed it multiple times. And it's not light, I'm not saying it's light, but the more you do it, it just becomes easier. So going back to this video, so they deployed it, as you can see, perpendicular. And when they deployed it, if you guys noticed, they didn't use poles.
Yeah.
Right? So this specific tactic was to raise a ladder without poles. You had 3 guys that were able to successfully raise this 45-foot ladder successfully, right? And this is probably the worst case scenario, where you have 0 space, but you can still get it up and you don't need the poles to be able to do this. Really, the biggest challenges that these guys faced that day, it was the wet ground. The butt of the ladder, just gets buried into the mud. It's difficult to kind of spin these ladders around, and that was probably the biggest challenge than anything else. But this was just one way of deploying it without ladders. Again, the challenge.
So we're still removing the poles and using the poles to stabilize the ladder once it's in an upright position.
Right.
We're just not using them to help us push it up.
This is kind of a down and dirty. So members of the department know that, hey, this ladder actually can be raised it's doable without the poles, as you can see here, and they did it multiple times. These guys probably deployed it 10 times that day without issue for the most part. Obviously, again, the terrain was the biggest challenge. All right, so this was doing the same setup, but using, so hey, what if I do have just a little bit more room and I can deploy the poles? Certainly if you can deploy the poles, and this is kind of the more traditional way that we showed a few years back, where you have one guy, so you have Master Firefighter Reinhardt here that's taking the poles, and he's able to assist in lifting the poles up. Again, this is just being able to raise it. This is a 4-person deployment. As they're raised, you see him kind of pushing up and assisting on that raise. Once it goes vertical, again, what we found more than anything else was turning the ladder was more of a challenge than really anything else, because it is heavy and it just wanted to sink into the ground. So it was just a challenge to spin it. You have to kind of pivot the ladder on one of the butts and then kind of turn it around. But as it's turning, it's also digging into the ground, and it starts kind of leaning a little bit. So we left this in specifically because we kind of realized one thing. If you guys can pause it there for a second. So again, these are things to consider and things to think about when you guys hopefully go out there and train on these things, is how you actually raise it. So this was raised with the bed section down. But what you can see here is, because we want the fly section out when we start extending it, what ended up happening is, because the bed section was out, it forced the pole firefighter into the building. So now he's
pushed the tip away from the building.
Yeah, he is forced between the building and the ladder. So this, we did do it again. When we did it again, we made sure that, hey, the fly section, let's take that half a second, flip the ladder over so the fly section is on the ground. So you see on this next deployment, when we raised it, we're now in a position, and actually the pole firefighter, Master Firefighter Reinhardt here, one thing to consider, and again, these are real life things that happen, so we didn't want to edit them, because this is something you have to overcome. As the ladders are raised, you have to make sure those the knuckle
toggles,
the toggles up top, that you spin those poles out, because it did get stuck as they were raising it, but he made really quick work of it and was able to recover smoothly without an issue. But those are things to consider. So because we had the fly section down, on this deployment, once they started turning it around, it put him in a better position. Mm-hmm. Now he's turning it, and he's able to get on the outside of the ladder and still spin this around. Again,
if something happens, he can push towards the building.
Exactly, right. So it's just a better position, right? To take that half a second, flip the ladder, put it on the fly section, so you put your guys in a better position when you're deploying it. And then the rest of the ladder was just same as probably most people have seen before. I think the last one was beam raise 45 or can, so the question was, can we beam raise at 45? Is that possible, especially when you're really limited on space? So we tried, okay, let's figure out if we have, no space again, can we make this work with one pole firefighter to help lift this and still do a beam raise with this ladder? So all these variations that we tried, trying to think of like the worst case scenario and how, again, we can still make this work. If there's people hanging, we need to figure out a way to do this. And they made it work. They did a beam raise, and they started. They made good work of the ladder. They raised it. They used the poles, and they were able to get it up successfully.
All right, so I think also, and kind of moving along a little bit, Franco, and I apologize. No. I think you have some pictures of some ladders in some various positions or various spots throughout. Is that right?
Yeah.
And can we move to those and kind of talk a little bit about some of those?
Yeah. So and that was pretty much it for the 45. The next couple of slides are, and we'll move quickly here, are still pictures. So some of the challenges we want to overcome. One was, you have what we mentioned before. You have a 24-foot ladder. The question is, what happens if you're a company 2? You arrive, you need to make a grab on the 4th floor. Do you have a 35-foot ladder? Well, you don't, but you can make it work. You can transition and try to make that work where you have a 24-foot ladder. You also have a 14. Again, things to consider: the stability of the balcony. Do you feel safe that the hooks on the ladder will hold to the balcony?
They are tested.
They are tested. It's a 500-pound capacity on the hooks. Of course, what we need to consider is the stability and the safety of the balcony railing. But there have been rescues done this way because there was no ladder available that was long enough, but companies made it work with a 24 and a 14. The other pictures that we show here is what happens when you have an offset, when you have this drop. So you have this, the entrance, and this is Quebec Terrace, and they're throughout the county. So we're going to see pictures of Quebec Terrace. We're going to see pictures of, here's Company 15. How do we get ladders down to the lower level and still be able to deploy these ladders to the top floors, the 3rd and 4th floor? This is significant challenges.
Certainly. And they're everywhere in the county.
Yeah.
You're right.
So how do we get these ladders into a position to extend them? So if you guys want to fast forward to the ladders here. So we tried various different ways on how to do this. A couple of those ways was, this is a 24-foot ground ladder. Again, this is Quebec Terrace. If we had to make rescues, simply just taking the 24-foot ladder, putting it down into the ground, resting up against the building, getting down into the ladder. And again, this is if you have to physically get a ladder down and yourself down as well, and then moving the ladder over to make rescues on the upper floors throughout. You guys want to move forward? Yep. So this one was another way of, can we extend the ladder while it's still on the railing itself and still be able to
using the same theory or same?
Yeah, same thing, but this is using the ladder to extend, getting in position. Again, this is just various ways of how do I get myself and my ladder down to a lower level so that I can deploy it to various windows. And this, I know Company 15 has a steeper drop, so this is where it would be beneficial, where you can extend the ladder a lot further down to get yourself into position. And as you can see, he extended it and just flipped it over right to the window.
Very nice.
Yeah, make a really quick work of rescues there. This was another one of, instead of actually extending it on the railing, it's taking the ladder and just allowing the ladder to play out yourself.
So we're holding the fly.
Yeah, we're basically holding the fly and the bed section together, we're creating some resistance until we're in position, allowing the ladder. Again, these are down and dirty ways of how can we make this work when we are presented with these types of buildings. And then I think one of the quickest ways and most efficient ways that we found that you'll see here, and I think this is kind of go-to, especially if the window that you're trying to get a ladder to is close by, is putting it in position. And once you put it in position, you extend it right from that position that that firefighter is in. Whereas this is Nick Bracchia extending it. He extends it to where he needs it and drops it right into position to the window to make a rescue.
Rescue or second means of egress.
Or second means of egress, yep.
What about these buildings well, here we go.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we want to talk about is how do we get, for second due ladder companies, how do we actually get ladders to these courtyards? These are all over the county, donut-shaped or...
Becoming more popular by the day.
Certainly, and they're becoming more of a challenge on how we're actually getting these ladders to the inside of these buildings. So I obviously, probably like most things, you have to kind of go out to these buildings and figure out how am I going to get these ladders up there, right? So this might be a circumstance where you're deploying one ladder to the second floor and then, you know, basically doing almost like a like you would if you're getting up to the roof and trying to
up, over, and down.
Up and over and down, right? So two videos that we kind of filmed was we went out to one of the donut-shaped buildings in Company 1's area where there is no access, there is no direct access to the courtyards. So you guys can, yep, thank you. All right, so if you're lucky enough, and this is where you have to go out and look at your buildings, sometimes the main entrance to these buildings, the lobby area, can dump directly out into the courtyard. But sometimes that's not the case, and maybe even most time it's not the case. The other things that we thought about is, okay, well, can we go through an apartment, go through the first floor apartment into into the courtyard? That, again, only works if both doors line up, because you're not going to, but somehow, some shape, way, or form, if you scout the building enough, hopefully this is where you're pre-planning, you'll find that kind of diamond in the rough and be able to find a pathway to get to this. So this particular building, we found one apartment, one entryway that gave us a straight shot, but we would have never found this, on the fire ground. It's going to be really difficult to find this, but we found one apartment, so we know for this building, on this specific circumstance, that we can go through this window and it is a straight shot into this apartment, that this door lines up perfectly with the entrance to this courtyard. Again, more than anything, it hopefully will spur a conversation with companies out there to say, okay, how are we going to make this work? Because what we did here is not necessarily going to work in other buildings, but we still, simply saying that getting ladders to the courtyard is not going to happen isn't a good answer, right?
Yeah, and now we're in the courtyard. We have other challenges.
Yeah.
Simply raising the ladder.
Yeah, with the obstructions
beam raise
that are in
or
there.
whatever kind of obstructions are there.
Again, just a survey. This building is donut shaped, but we're lucky enough that we actually have kind of an open access to be able to deploy this ladder through this kind of donut shaped style building. But again, only way you're going to know this is going out there and surveying your first due and trying to figure this out.
And to kind of wind it down, I know we're pushing our time frame a little bit.
Sure.
What kind of cleaning the ladder?
Yes.
How often do we do this? What kind of products do we use?
Yeah. So in coordination with small tools and departments. So hopefully, if it hasn't arrived yet, every station commander out in the field should be receiving this Duo Safety ladder wax. It's a paraffin wax made by Duo Safety. It's red in color specifically because you actually can see where you're actually applying it. So hopefully it should be in everyone's inbox here with the station commanders, if hopefully shortly, or if it's not there already. So this is just kind of a general rule of thumb on how to clean ladders, just something really quick and easy. So the way we do it at Company 19, we soak the ladders down with like a simple green or degreaser. We agitate it, we scrub it down, scrub down the halyards, we let it soak for a few minutes. We're lucky enough that we have a power washer, so we'll take a power washer after it's soaked for a while, and we'll power wash the ladders. Because I'm sure in the past most companies didn't have wax, so a lot of people were probably using a petroleum-based wax. The issue with petroleum-based is it attracts so much grit and dirt and everything else. So trying to clean these ladders, especially with power washer if you have it, is really beneficial because you're able to get a lot of that petroleum-based product if it's been used. And you can see these halyards here are dirty. We're able to clean them successfully with using this power washer. We can actually probably just go through to the wax up. Yep. So whenever you're using this, a lot of times we end up just taking little bits and pieces, cutting bits and pieces of the wax, because there can be so many nooks and crannies, but we're waxing the fly section where the actual guides go through. We're waxing the dogs and all the latches. Basically any place that you can find where metal and metal is making contact, where there's a friction point. Again, this is us just getting little bits and pieces of the wax and trying to get those guides in, because that's where it's actually going to be sliding in and out.
So every firehouse is going to have this?
Every firehouse is going to have it. Again, this is the fly section. This is the outer edge of where this particular piece of the ladder goes in and out of those guides. That's where you want to make those and again, just working the ladder up and down once we have the wax applied.
Well, Lieutenant, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and energy and effort
pleasure.
coming here today and making all of these videos. And I guess the really takeaway from my stance is we have to get out there and practice.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we're going to do things wrong, and it takes those wrongs to sort out how to do it correctly.
Oh, yeah.
No matter what size of the ladder is.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
If anybody has any questions or concerns or comments, please feel free to email myself, email the lieutenant. And if it's something, you can send it back to me, and we'll share it next episode. I do want to remind everybody before we leave, next Wednesday, so a week from today, is our next Boss Talk. It'll be an evening session, and we're going to do first in company operations. Basically, the things that they did in the last COLA class, we're going to bring to you all. So we're going to take pictures. We're going to take three officers from various places throughout the county, and we're going to talk about the IRP and strategy and some tactics and what you would do in a certain situation. And then our next challenge in the street, it comes from Chief Dempsey, who, if you remember, has done 2 other presentations. This one is on May 19th, or his will be on May 19th. It will also be an evening session, and it will be on automatic sprinkler systems. So until next week, thank you.